If you haven't already seen Om's Twitter account, he's slowly turning into one of those fanboy accounts that just basically tweets propaganda about a certain player only. Now, I will say,
Cry about it. I'm leaning into it.
And cry about it is exactly what I would expect someone on football Twitter to say to me. To be fair, it's hard to argue with standing Vinicius right now. It's one thing to be clinging on to a player, and I trust that you won't put a halo around him once he starts, missing a couple easy chances,
Look,
God forbid.
I critiqued him a lot last season, right? People forget that, and it wasn't like I lost faith in him type thing. It was he's not playing well. Remember, we went through the whole statistics with how his dribbling was actually falling off and stuff, and we discussed how his confidence was actually affecting his overall game. Look, Vinicius is not going to stay, scoring, a goal every 2 minutes or something, outscoring Messi, Mbappe, Neymar combined in non-penalty goals. Like there's going to be a little bit of a drop off, right? And so, yeah, I mean, that comes, right? We'll discuss how it is then. But this does give me a good feeling that, okay, obviously there'll be more of kind of a realistic regression. But there is a feeling, and I do think there's something genuine here that after that, and depending on how he reacts to falling off a little bit, I mean, we could be looking at a pretty productive season here. But again, it's something we'll have to see. But at the moment, right, with how he's going, there does seem to be something, at least the core of this, that feels very real, not just because of what's happening now, but because of what we've been talking about before, right? Just that you just need these pieces to come good. And when the underlying, kind of argument hasn't changed for me, I feel pretty comfortable, riding this train. And obviously I'm going on the highs now, but in terms of the analysis, for sure, I mean, he's 21 years old. There's going to be a point in the season, probably November, December, going to have a couple of games. We'll point it out then like I did last season. I'll be harsh on him and critique him fairly in the moment, but I'll take my wins as they come, and I'll be insufferable about it.
You get those retweets and likes, my friend. It's a great PR tactic. Vinicius.
What did I say in the tweet that was wrong, though? Why are you so salty about this?
There's no salt. Absolutely zero salt for I'm happy for you. I'm happy for Vinicius. I'm happy that my team won, and I'm happy that a player that I love played really well. And I just enjoying the story arc of you becoming one of the fanboys on Twitter of a certain player. That's all. I'm happy for you. Vinicius had you know what I love about this Vinicius performance? And as always, our podcast has zero structure. We're not really doing this in any coherent chronological order. We're just jumping into Vinicius talk after just discussing him for a moment to start the podcast. What I love about him in this game, and I've loved his performances all season because he's playing with a certain swagger, and the body language seems good. And obviously we've spoken about this a lot, that he really needed to work on one or two things, and one thing in particular, and that was scoring goals, and he's doing that. And I like today's was a deflected goal. I kind of believe in the intangible thing that when it's on, and you're in a flow, you'll just get goals like that. Sometimes you can will the ball into the net if you're in the zone. You're going to get goals like that because you're being proactive, you're being positive. In this game, there were moments where he went at Thierry Correa and Correa picked his pocket. Or there was a moment where Guillamon comes over from the left side and steals it from him. None of that mattered. None of that made him get himself in his head. He didn't have a prolific game in terms of dribbles completed, but he just went from minute 0 to 90 full throttle without losing an ounce of confidence. Even when he lost the ball, he kept going. He kept getting himself into good positions, and he came up big at the end. The assist was beautiful. His positioning was good on his goal. I just think that these are really encouraging signs on him, and I was a huge fan of the performance. I'm totally okay with leading this podcast with his performance, which I don't think was a masterclass, but it was just him being a different player and a different mindset, and being able to do some really individually brilliant things in the second half. And I just like that aspect of his game tonight in particular.
Yeah, so the interesting thing was in terms of like his dribbling and everything, this is like maybe his weakest game of the season. Only one completed dribble off 5 attempts, right? It wasn't really coming off for him. And we talked about how there's other aspects to Vinicius's game, like the dangerous off-ball runs and stuff, and how he's underrated about getting into good locations in the box. But sometimes in prior games past, right, when that stuff isn't coming off for Vinicius, he can like already in that kind of period where he had some shaky confidence in front of goal, he might, decide to stop going into them, right? We sometimes talked about last season how he just, his dribbling volume dropped when he was 1 versus 1. He wouldn't go for it, right? He just turned and passed back inside, or he might go completely the other way, right? And just start forcing everything through brute volume, just try to find a way to make an impact off the dribble. And the thing is he'll have games like this because dribbling is such a variable like skill in terms of outcome, right? Like there will just be certain games where because the opponent is doing well 1 versus 1, or because your timing is just slightly off. I mean, so many things can happen in a dynamic 1 versus 1 situation, right? Where they're just not going to come off. You're not going to get the completions, and you can't let that rattle you. And you have to find a way to still make an impact otherwise. And I think the thing that impresses me, and I think this is just super noticeable with Vinicius, right? Always wary about judging body language, but based on the way we've observed this player and how he looked in his past play now, you could just see confidence radiating from every action that he does. I think through the crispness of execution as well. And so, yeah, the dribbling honestly wasn't coming off. I thought through large stretches of this game, man, this is the come down game. I was thinking, right, this is the one where, okay, we come back to reality a little bit with Vinicius because he's not making magic happen every time he touches the ball. But I say that, and I thought his passing was actually, there was something to his passing this game where even with one he didn't pull off. Like there was a switch he played to the other side that was a little off, but it ended up leading to like Benzema fighting for the ball on the end line, making his way towards goal, combining with Hazard, and it led to a shot. Like some of his passes were like just crisp. They were confident. They were executed quickly. Some of them were coming like from really tough positions where the release angle wasn't obvious, and he found a way to get it off. Like there was a moment in transition where he kind of cuts inside, surrounded by defenders, and there's no real pass, and he just kind of like uses the toe of his boot, and he finds a central midfielder arriving, and he keeps possession. There was another one early in the game where he just fires a pass between a defender's leg. It's like a long through ball, and it finds Hazard in the box. Like, this is the kind of stuff like I want to see from Vinicius when maybe the dribbling aspect of his game isn't really coming off, right? Finding a way to make like, aggregate small impact through passing here and there, and just it seems like he's just seeing things a little quicker and then trusting his technique and going for it, which it seems to be that like the finishing, like once he feels he has that, it's just there's a relaxation that comes to everything else to his game, and he can just fall back and say, okay, I trust that I'm good enough to pull stuff off. And yeah, I mean, I'm not sure he ever really got the dribbling going, but that's fine because he didn't start forcing stuff randomly. He still went for it in the right moments, I think, even if it didn't come off. And then he ends up firing off a shot, which I think he took this shot well. It was a good shot to take. And then luck went his way, which will happen, right? If you take good shots in the box, or I mean, it wasn't an amazing shot location, but in that instance, he made the right decision taking it first time. It was decently placed as far as I could tell. He got the luck. But then what really impresses me, and this I think links back to the passing because it was a cross, is that assist to Benzema was incredible. That was the action that stood out to me more than the goal because, I mean, he just immediately chops back onto his right foot. There's barely any time to assess what's going on because you have two runners in the box, Benzema, Jovic. He has to make his decision instant. And on the replay, it's super obvious that it needs to be a perfect ball because there's two defenders they're literally like bodying Benzema, right? Like desperately fighting to prevent the winners so they can keep the points. The goalkeeper is coming out. It's an incredibly small window that Vinicius has to hit there. And if it's, I don't know, 6 inches off or something, maybe even like a lesser amount, that's not a goal. That's not going in because it's such a small margin for error, and it was inch perfect, and it happened within a flash. That really impressed me, where I was looking at like maybe over a full 90 minutes, Vinicius' impact wasn't consistent. He wasn't, constantly threatening the defense in ways we've seen in prior games. but he never faltered, right? His confidence was there. He trusted in what he could do, and he was just seeing things and acting decisively and executing well in his passing game, and I think that manifested in the winning goal, and that's what impressed me about his performance today. So I agree with you. I don't think it's a masterclass. I love Vinicius, but I'm not gonna every time he makes an impact, I'm not gonna pretend it's the greatest performance ever. But this is, again, we'll see how the confidence sustains, but there's a sense here that he's figuring it out, right? That once he kind of gets himself in the right mental place, he knows he can make a difference, right? And as long as that belief holds, he will. And that's where my faith kind of comes in him, because everything else is there. All the other technical pieces are there. He seems to be reading the game better, and it's making an impact right now. Like in games where we aren't actually playing that well as a team, we're winning points because in addition to Karim Benzema, now we also have one of the most differential players in the league in him, at least for the moment.
You mentioned like the perfection of that cross and how perfect it needed to be. I also think in conjunction to that, Benzema's run needed to be perfect as well, and it was. And you look at the way Benzema was moving through that whole sequence. He saw it right as Vinicius was about to hit that cross. He just makes the dart to the far post, and he connects with his shoulder, with his eyes closed, whatever, it went in. The run was great. The pass was great. Poor Jovic. Jovic will never get credit for this stuff, and even probably me saying this.
So Matt went on Twitter and he tweeted about it, but I agree with him. Jovic made a good run there. That was important.
Yeah, and good on Matt for doing that. I didn't see that, but and I'm sure some people will probably roll their eyes at us even emphasizing this, because the argument always with him is like, well, we need goals. We don't care about these runs. Well, these runs are important. He actually did this at the beginning of last season too. The benefit of Jovic has always been, one of the benefits and probably the benefit of him at Real so far, because he's just not lucky enough to score goals, is anytime he's in the box with Benzema, he's always dragging defenders away. In a game like this, Vinicius and Benzema will be the talking points, and rightfully so. They combined for the 2 goals. They've combined for 11 goals on the season, which is a fantastic statistic, by the way, given that we are 5 games into the La Liga season now. This is the 5th one. Incredible statistic. And if you told us that after 5 games, Benzema and Vinicius would combine for 11 goals and Vinicius would have 5 of them, we'd all sign up for that. Benzema obviously.
Look, we might have took 5 goals for Vinicius across the season, to be
very
honest.
True.
Right? I would with more assists.
Yes, I would have taken that at a half season mark. Full season, I would have been disappointed that he wouldn't have scored more than 5. But half season mark, I would have signed up for that and just hope that he'd be on pace for 10. I would have signed up for that, to be quite honest. But this is highly encouraging. Benzema obviously has 5 assists as well. Vinicius, this was his first assist of the La Liga season, and they've combined for 30 shot creating actions over these five games. Those 2, all encouraging stuff. They'll be the main talking points. I don't think it'll get lost, but I think it's worth highlighting that I thought Hazard was pretty good in the first half. In the second half, maybe he didn't do much damage before he came off. But I liked his performance. It kind of reminded me, it wasn't nearly as good, don't get me wrong. It wasn't nearly as good as the Belgium game against Czech Republic over the international break. But he did some things in this game that remind me of that, where he receives the ball in between the lines. He advances the ball forward, and he makes just this nice calculated cut back and finds a running player in the box or someone arriving at the top of the box. Like he had one to Casemiro at the top of the box. 4 key passes at halftime, 6 overall, 3 completed dribbles. Most of that, all the completed dribbles, I think, were in the first half. I liked this Hazard performance. In the first half, I don't know if there's much impact that he had in the second half. Nothing that I can remember off the top of my head anyway. He had one play where he does link well with transition with Benzema, but I thought this was a pretty good Hazard game, and I thought it was worth highlighting that in a difficult game at the Mestalla where defensive structure, whack, Dealing with pressure, whack. The front three, I thought they gave us good production overall.
I liked Hazard's performance. It was interesting to see the amount of people who were saying or who were kind of criticizing him. Again, I don't know, maybe it's like relative to expectation, what people's expectations of Hazard are. Like after the Belgium game, they're like, all right, this is back, he's back or whatever. In a comment or something, I saw someone say like after the Belgium game, I disagree with he's going to be that player again. He's not. I don't know. I mean, again, I kind of had my whole thing on Hazard about how he's this type of number 10 connective tissue player now. He'll give you little bursts here and there. I understand a lot of people are still like, well, he's going to be back to his old self. Raj put out a really good video on Hazard and why he might be recovering like properly from his injuries once and for all. Whether that means he's going to get back to his old self, I don't know or not. And Raj, didn't make that claim either. So I understand where that optimism coming from. But for me, I still kind of see Hazard the way I saw him before. And within that kind of role, I think he did quite well. Like, it took a while, but I think his chemistry with Benzema, and it's kind of surprising how quickly it's developed with Vinicius, actually. But I think their chemistry was really good today, right? Like, there were two moments where Hazard just leaves a pass that was maybe intended for him, maybe not. That one goes to Vinicius, one goes to Benzema, and it leads to counterattacks. Like, there was a good synergy between them in transition. He was linking well between the lines. He had like 2 or 3 moments where he kind of spun away with little like bursts of speed, made something happen. I think the key passes is probably a little inflated by the amount of long shots that we took because we didn't actually create that many great chances. I mean, the Benzema one was really the only one. Otherwise, we were actually kind of really struggling. Or maybe the other Benzema one in the box that was blocked, you could say was a decent one. But so I guess, 6 key passes kind of makes it seem like Hazard just had a monster creation day. That I don't know if that was the case, but he was sharp between the lines. He was making things happen. He was disorganizing the defense, and I was largely pleased with what I saw from him offensively. In this role, I think this is where we kind of see the best for him. I think the more interesting conversation is not, is Hazard, did he play well or not? Are we going to see the old Hazard? I mean, one is answered for me. I thought it was pretty obvious he played well. 2, we've been having this, are we going to see the whole Hazard conversation for like 50 years now? If that still interests you, you can have that. I think the more interesting conversation is the amount of like accommodation we make from a structural perspective to fit Hazard alongside Vinicius in. And I think Ancelotti personally agrees with me just based on the way he's using Hazard, right? And using him as this roaming number 10, because we once again see Benzema, Hazard, Vinicius, and like a Fede, Casemiro, Modric midfield, but Hazard has most of his touches on the left-hand side. He roamed over to the right a bit, but again, there's that left-hand side bias, and yet Vinicius is playing as a proper left winger, and Benzema's kind of doing his thing up top. Meanwhile, while Fede kind of has to, again, straddle 2 roles on the right wing and right central midfield, and he stretched out wide, but most of his touches were located in the high right half space, which is kind of what we expect, how he manages that role. And there was a big responsibility initially on Carvajal, and then after he got injured, Lucas, to just basically be the only guy holding width on the right. And it creates these like left-sided overloads that are nice. There are good interchanges. It creates options between the lines. But I think the question is all that stuff Hazard doing is nice, but is it actually better than just playing Rodrigo out on the right-hand side like we saw in the second half and being able to use the entire width of the pitch and use 2 sides to attack the opposition rather than, all right, we overload one side, we have more options between the lines, and we can get interchanges. Like, which one is superior, right? Is what Hazard providing, is that worth more than just, expanding the offense to the entire team and making it a little more balanced? I think that's an interesting conversation, the more relevant conversation to actually be having after we've seen a couple of these performances. And you saw Hazard play pretty well, but also, in my opinion, like there was something different to our attack that found something else once we balanced it out, put Rodrigo out on the right-hand side. And again, Rodrigo made the difference versus Inter, but that was kind of different because Lucas was playing out there originally, right? So that for me is kind of where my mind is at when thinking about this, because I think the rest of the conversations were fairly straightforward.
This is I was going to go on this exact monologue. I had this prepared already, and you basically did it already, and now I'm annoyed. But if I were to add to it, not because I can't repeat anything you just said, but I will say I agree with everything you just said. I think it's an important point to bring up. And I think if Hazard is going to play this new role, and it's a new stage of his career where he's not necessarily being this elite line breaker, dribbling at players constantly like the way he did at Chelsea in his last season, that the need for that type of player is somewhat lessened with the way Vinicius is playing right now. So if Vinicius is going to be the guy who's just going to go at players mercilessly all game, and he's going to take players on, and he's going to go at them, he's going to run at them, then maybe Hazard can play a little bit of a different hybrid role. And we've been talking. It was the Inter game we were talking about. Like, I think we could have used a central presence. Obviously, Ancelotti in the post-game press conference disagreed with that. He said he said Inter closed all the central spaces, so he wanted to go out wide. Sure, but somebody at least to help move between the lines in those channels, and Hazard can do that. And I like him in this role way better than I do as a pure right winger. I actually like that we had that possession going through the left. And Vinicius, Benzema, and Hazard were linking up with each other. I thought that aspect of our game looked pretty good. One of the things that I would like to see us do better, and part of this plan maybe gets derailed a little bit with Bale's injury, which, I don't know, is a whole other thing that I think we probably should have discussed by now, but how many times have we discussed this over the past few years? So I'm almost like desensitized or just at my limit on discussing Bale injuries. I'm just sad, and even though I don't expect him to be healthy, it's still sad every time I see him get injured and all that, and especially because he seemed to have an encouraging start to the season. But alas, I think if you're funneling possession to the left side and trying to suck teams into that side and then switching it, the effectiveness of that idea and the switch becomes not as great if Carvajal is not there, because he's used to playing that role so well over the years. And also, like, if, Rodrigo in the past 2 games has immediately made an impact off the bench, and obviously he scored against Inter. He was involved in the build-up to the first goal today. I don't know if, it's not as exciting if somebody else isn't there, but like, I don't know. I just don't. I mentioned this at halftime when Carvajal came off the field for Vasquez. We really need Vasquez to be really good in when those crossfield switches come. And I still think the Vasquez-Fede pairing on that right side is kind of, I don't know. It's not that great offensively to me, and I think both of those players can be good offensively in their own ways. I just don't know if those two together is the most exciting right-sided pairing from an attacking standpoint. So that's something that Ancelotti is going to have to juggle. And me personally, now this discussion is all over the place, and I'm not saying Nacho would be the solution, but I almost would have rather that Miguel comes in this game and then we shifted Nacho to the right back position. But that's a whole different discussion that I don't know if we want to get into right now. But just, those are my thoughts on Hazard on the left and a free roaming role. If he's going to play a role where he helps the midfield, bind the midfield to the attack and play as this kind of free roaming role, then I'm okay with it. I have question marks over it defensively because our press still sucks, and it's even slower build up phases. We struggled not getting penetrated, but Hazard did have that crazy challenge in the first half. Remember when he comes in flying, sprinting from the other side? Now that's a whole different thing, because I'm not sure what our structure was in that moment where Hazard had to sprint from the other side of the field to close down Musa. But he did it, and he got fouled, and it was a great defensive effort. So I don't know if that's sustainable, but it was a moment that at least got me excited.